Okay, let's do our thing, and we're gonna start with let me start with Senator Augustine and Alexis. Let's just go from the top and take it from there.
All right, Senate Bill 62. Land use public service companies, pollinator friendly vegetation management. This bill generally prohibits a local jurisdiction from placing restrictions and unreasonable limitations on pollinator friendly vegetation management, which consist of practices that reduce the efficacy or increase the cost of pollinator friendly vegetation management, or practices that require turf grass, specifically on a public service company's lands that are being overseen through a right of way, for example. The bill defines public or pollinator friendly vegetation management to mean landscape management that creates habitats for wildlife, and authorizes the land use restriction or limitation to apply for the sake of health and safety. So those particular health and safety practices would be exempted from the exemption. There are sponsor amendments that are included in the packet, which clarifies the scope of the exemption and specifies that it applies to a utility designated pollinator area. Clarifies that any mowing restrictions do not apply outside of the utility designated pollinator area. Specifies mowing practices to be completed or exercised in this area by requiring that mowing, if the utility so chooses to mow and engage in pollinator friendly vegetation management, has to occur during certain months, either November 1st through March 31st or October 1st through April 30th specifically for Western Maryland. Broadens the definition of permitted pollinator friendly vegetation management practices to include employing no-mow methods and integrated vegetation management, specifically to maintain a low-growing plant community. The amendment finally, in uncodified language, clarifies that the bill does not intend to interfere with noxious weed laws or any practices by a public service company that occur outside of a utility designated pollinator area.
Senator Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I got to thank Alexis. She really helped me and worked really hard on this. What we really were trying to do is just make sure that we have these pollinator friendly spaces, but that we made it narrow and that it fit with, such that it couldn't be abused, but that it also wasn't going to interfere with the agricultural noxious weeds. We want to make sure it didn't interfere with that. So we made sure it doesn't interfere with that. At the end of the day, we're just trying to, have this narrow piece where we're able to help with these pollinator friendly spaces. I think we've actually gotten to it. And so I would ask that we move favorable on the amendments.
Okay, is there second? Or, okay, now we'll discussion. Any questions for Alexis or Senator Augustine?
I just want to thank the good senator for working on that the noxious weeds thing. And I was wondering if council could tell us what page that is
okay,
on?
So that brings up a really important piece. So let me find the page. Thank you. So the end of the amendment reprint is on page 11. And then, so I kind of wrote in, see next page for the substitute language. And that uncodified language is how that section 2 will be read now. So at the beginning, it says it's the intent of the General Assembly that nothing in the act shall be interpreted to modify, limit, or interfere with state or local laws related to weed control. Under Title 9, Subtitle 4, which is the State Noxious Weeds Authorization section, subtitle rather.
And so why was it in uncodified language?
Because it's just a clarifier, right? So looking at
They were comfortable with this.
The Department of Agriculture is
Correct.
comfortable with this.
Yes.
Okay.
We went over it. They knew because what this was doing was not going to negatively impact the existing law, which is already there, but just wanted to make sure to clarify here that it does not do that by referencing the law that's in the agriculture article.
I'm good.
Any further discussion and questions? Senator Carozza?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going through the bill file and saw that Delmarva Power had a letter of information, and I didn't quite follow the beginning presentation as far as if the amended version of this bill addressed any of the issues they raised, and I'm just playing a little catch up to find out.
With the utilities, and got to them to a position of neutral on the bill, including adding in the uncodified language, which, you know, again, helps to kind of clarify what the bill does do and what the bill does not do, including Delmarva.
Get me to the language that would address their concerns in the amended version and the.
So for Delmarva, the bill as redrafted dealt with Delmarva's concerns. And we, with the way that it was redrafted, where we made these definitions of what exactly were these pollinator friendly mowing practices, that got them to the point of neutral. But we added additional language in the back just to be even further clarifying that that does not, you know, that it doesn't impact their vegetation management pollinator friendly practices that are outside of the designated pollinator areas, for any concerns that they may have that it would be, negatively impact what work they were doing in other places. That is, again, that's on page 12, but the language as far as like how we updated and built the definitions for pollinator friendly practices are the bill basically as a whole, as was, as Alexis mentioned. So that's the whole thing from basically from page 5, where you start to get the new definitions of what the pollinator friendly practices actually are. And then they go all the way through, for the balance of the bill.
Okay, additional questions for Senator Augustine or Alexis? Okay, we had a motion on the amendments and a second from Senator Hester. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor of the amendments, raise your hand. All opposed, the amendments carry.
Favorable on the bill as amended.
Okay, is there a second? Senator Brooks. Any discussion on the bill as amended? So I can get a read from everybody. Okay. Well, then all in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, bill carries. Alexis, next up, Senate Bill 143.
So I will qualify this by saying that the amendments are not quite through editing yet, so they have not been included in the packet. We did consider this bill last week with the amendments as they stood then. So if the will is to speak to them conceptually, I surely can. So.
Let me just step in and then you can fill in.
Okay.
If you recall, this is a pretty narrow bill dealing with net metering. And under our, current provisions, and this is, I think, if you recall, we have this very limited option, like net metering the consumers. It's April to April. It kind of rolls over during that April to April period. At the end of April, you get a check, and you don't necessarily know what that even represents. All the bill as it came in was, it said, well, it was going to move that April date to a later date, but it also provided the possibility of the ability to roll over your excess credits. So I got rid of the August date. So it's everything about the bill is the same as current law, except that you now have an option under these amendments to carry over when you get to April and you don't want to get that $5 check. You can actually carry over your excess credits into future periods. And so there was a lot, obviously, there was the flexibility appeals to Farm Bureau, Office of People's Counsel, environmental groups. I mean, there was a lot of folks just in effect. The only pushback was the utilities, that it would have an IT cost, et cetera, for them to put the billing adjustments in place. So, I mean, essentially, it just takes us from this no options, April to April, to allow businesses and residential consumers who are in the net metering world to use this excess and carry it over rather than getting a $5 check and starting a whole brand new. But you can't game it. So when you make that election, you can't then go back. You got to make an election at some point, do you want to exercise your rollout option? I mean, your rollover option, or stick with the April to April? That's essentially what the bill now does. And, but Alexis, why don't you, fill in some gaps here?
Sure. So I'll just refer to my script a little bit. So Senate Bill 143, electricity net energy metering, accrual of net excess generation. Net Metering Flexibility Act, it modifies the state's net metering energy or net energy metering law by authorizing a customer to accrue net excess generation indefinitely. It modifies the current net excess generation accrual scheme by changing the billing cycle date yearly from April to August. So essentially, as mentioned, the April to August date will apply under the current statutory scheme of this yearly accrual. And then there's been this additional indefinite rollover provision.
I thought we got rid of I thought we were sticking with just
With the
April to
amendments.
April. Okay, so the amendments get rid of this
Take-
August date
Mhm.
because it didn't seem like they're the juice in the squeeze. So it's still the current April to April
Right.
cycle. Under the amendments, the only thing that's changed is you've got the
Indefinite.
flexibility of that excess rollover period, right?
So going on the amendments, so as Senator Feldman just mentioned, the amendments retain that current provision that's already in statute for the yearly accrual. So that portion is left alone. The municipal utilities, which incorporate the towns of Hagerstown, Berlin, Williamsport, Eastern, and Thurmont, are carved out from compliance with the indefinite accrual provision to accommodate some of the billing and
Yeah, let me just add that, we've done that a lot of like the co-ops, and some of those, the IT costs are high for them, not so much for the big utilities. So just as an accommodation, they're not going to be subject to this extra option.
additionally.
And I think community solar, we added that.
That's right. So there is a provision as well that would prohibit these customers under the net energy metering law from switching from indefinite accrual if they were already on the default accrual without approval of the electric company. The amendments also,
Oh, yeah, okay, on that one, just to be clear, so if you do, you can switch back, but you would need the approval of the utility to allow you to go back, just to avoid sort of, again, attempted gaming things, or I don't know. That's not really the core point. I just want to throw in that you can go back if you can get some kind of approval.
and so sort of touching on this flip piece, well, not necessarily the flip, but opting for the additional option clarifies that a customer generator is able to accrue indefinite net excess generation, even if they were under the default scheme previously. However, the prohibition against switching back and forth is retained. It expands this accrual of net excess generation to community solar under the term virtual net excess generation. So you don't have to physically be located, like doesn't apply solely to rooftop panels, for example. It allows the Public Service Commission to develop regulations to prescribe billing for indefinite rollover. And that is the provision that we are still waiting on language for. But essentially, the cost, the allocation, and how the cash out provisions occur under indefinite rollover will be deferred to the Public Service Commission to work out the details across the utilities and co-ops.
Okay, any discussion on those amendments or the underlying bill? Senator Carozza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, I apologize for playing a little bit of catch up. I was going back to where Berlin's mentioned in the munis, and did that already exempt the munis?
Yeah, they're out.
Okay, is
They're
there,
not subject to these new provisions.
okay, is there anybody else that is out?
So all of the municipal
All
utilities, right?
all
So
the okay,
so it's five. It's Hagerstown, Berlin, Williamsport, Easton, and Thurmont.
okay,
So those are specific to the utility companies that are operated by the municipality, though. So not investor owned, not these cooperatives, just the municipality led ones.
just those five.
5, yes.
Thank you.
Any additional questions on about the amendments? Okay, any motion on the table, move the amendments, any interest? Senator Brooks, would you be so kind? Okay, second, Gallion. Okay, all in favor of amendments, raise your hand. Okay, all opposed, amendments carry. Any motion on the bill as amended? Senator Brooks, Senator Gallion, all in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, bill carries. Next up, Senator Reedy, Senate Bill 271.
Senate Bill 271, Education, Maryland Civic Engagement Program established. This bill establishes the Maryland Civic Engagement Program as a voluntary program in which local school systems may participate to recognize students in public schools that promote civic readiness and civic engagement of students in public schools. The bill establishes minimum standards for participating local school system to 1, award a student seal of civic engagement, and 2, designate a public school as a center of civic engagement. Participating local school systems must recognize students in schools that meet requirements for the civic engagement program as specified. By July 1, 2024, and each July thereafter, each participating local school system must submit to the State Department of Education a report on the program based on the most recently completed school year. There is one amendment. It's on page 13 in your voting packet. This is from the sponsor, Senator Reedy. And this amendment would alter the name of the program to the Maryland Civic Excellence Program. It provides that the program begins in the 2024-2025 school year. It strikes election campaigns from participation in a volunteer activity and lowers the threshold for schools to achieve a Center of Civic Excellence designation from 75% to 50% of students having earned a seal of civic excellence.
Motion favorable on the amendment, the Reedy amendment. Senator Lewis Young, is that a second or a question? Okay, it's a second. All in favor of the Reedy amendment, raise your hand. All opposed. Favorable on the bill as amended, a second. Senator Lewis Young. Any discussion on the bill as amended? Okay, all in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, that bill carries. Next up, Senator Mouts.
Senate Bill 302, Talbot County Board of Education Election of Officers. This bill requires the Talbot County Board of Education to elect a president and vice president from among its members at the last meeting at the end of each calendar year or at the meeting in December each year. Essentially, this is to coincide with the election of new members instead of having them elected at the first meeting of the year. There are no amendments, and there we have received a local letter.
Okay, we have a letter from delegation. Any discussion? There are no amendments. Moving favorable, Brooks, second Gallion. All in favor? Bill as favorable, raise your hand. All opposed, that bill carries. Next up, next up is 327. Are we at 327 here? Yeah. So this bill, there's some action quite candidly over in the House, I think. They're looking to make some changes. So I'm on 327, we're gonna hold that bill to our next voting session and see sort of how things are materializing before we just move forward. Okay, next up, Senator Bill. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just to make sure it's covered, if we leave this to the House. If you recall some of the discussion, the sponsor has language in here that allows, the sponsor has language in here that allows certain counties to opt out.
Right.
And what we did within Prince George's County, we had certain districts choose to opt out. What I got back from DNR is that they can't do it on a district basis. You have to establish streets.
Right.
And so I've been in discussion with Senator Jackson, Senator Muse to try to figure out what those will be. And so I will alert all of those to make sure their inputs are sent to the House side. So when we get it back, it's all taken care of. But I was going to ask for a hold to work on those as well.
Okay, so we're all aligned. This is, Bill, we're going to do, we want to at least have the benefit of what they're doing there, plus the points you just made. So let's, so we're going to hold this for now till
Okay.
Tuesday, and
Thank you.
we'll deal with it then. Okay, Senator Hershey's bill, Senate Bill 402 is next up, and we're going to go back to you, Stacy.
Senate Bill 402, Kent County Board of Education Student Member. This bill codifies a non-voting student member of the Kent County Board of Education into statute and specifies the selection method and responsibilities of the student member. The bill makes other conforming changes to distinguish between provisions relating to a regular voting member and the non-voting student member. The student member serves a one-year term, and the initial term of the student member must begin on July 1, 2024. There is one amendment from the sponsor, Senator Hershey, here on page 28 of your voting packet. And this amendment clarifies that the student member must be a member of student government and not a student government association representative. It strikes the provision requiring the new student member to attend the May and June meetings of the Board of Education before the student member's term begins, and prohibits a student member from attending an executive session of the board. We have a local letter supporting the bill with these amendments.
Okay. Anybody want to move those amendments? Senator Hershey, okay, Senator Brooks, Senator Gallion. Any discussion on the Hershey amendments? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? All opposed? Amendments carry. Bill as amended, anybody want to move favorable on that? Senator Gallion, Senator Brooks, any discussion? All in favor of the bill as amended? We're talking again, Senate Bill 402, raise your hand. All opposed? And that bill carries. Next up, Senator Hayes, Senate Bill 445. And we're going to Alexis.
Senate Bill 445, appraisal gap from historic redlining financial assistance program alterations. This bill expands the forms of financial assistance applicable to the appraisal gap from historic redlining program within DHCD. Under the bill, types of financial assistance will now include loans, grants, additional financial assurances, credits, and other loan products. Additionally, the bill makes eligible for funding proposed projects instead of completed projects, removes the cap on maximum financial assistance. It modifies the definition of affordable for purposes of the sale and resale of renovated homes to be designated by the secretary instead of statutorily determined. The DHCD advises that these are essentially conforming changes so that this program can be operable.
Okay, did you say there were amendments or no amendments?
No amendments.
Okay, any discussion about the bill? Clean bill? Okay, no discussions or motion? Bill. Senator Brooks, Senator Lewis Young, any discussion on the bill? Favorable motion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor, raise your hand. All opposed, bill carries. Next up, Senate Bill 482, Senator Lewis Young. Oh, I'm sorry, I apologize, 471. I understand somebody may want to, somebody had implied that they wanted to do a hold on this.
Do you want me to read the?
Yeah, why don't you tell us about what Senate Bill 471 does before
All
we
right,
do
so
it?
Senate Bill 471, water pollution control, discharge permits, stormwater associated with construction activity. This bill prohibits the Maryland Department of the Environment under specified conditions from authorizing the discharge of stormwater associated with construction activity under a general discharge permit. Instead, the department must require an individual discharge permit. The bill also establishes a prohibition against causing, allowing, or failing to control soil or other pollutant runoff from the construction site or causing erosion into waters of the state within 500 feet of the site. Finally, the bill establishes related enforcement and penalty provisions. There are amendments, they're in your bill packet. The amendments begin on page 30. The reprint begins on page 36. These are amendments being offered by the bill sponsor, Senator Elfreth. These would require the Department of the Environment to review and update the specifications for sediment control plans on or before December 1st, 2024, and every 5 years thereafter as specified, and to report to the General Assembly before finalizing any update. It also adds uncodified language requiring the department to report to the General Assembly on its plans for reviewing and updating specifications for sediment control plans in accordance with the bill on or before November 1st, 2023. The more substantive changes, this strikes all the language in the bill that would have required those individual permits. and instead establishes enhanced public comment requirements for construction activities in specified sensitive areas. So those are watersheds and catchments that drain into high quality waters, critical area buffers, and FEMA identified floodplains. Finally, the bill strikes all of the language related to local enforcement, as well as all the language establishing heightened penalty provisions. Will say I have heard from the builders and NIOP, they are okay with the bill as amended.
Well, I may have jumped the gun here. Is there any discussion on these amendments, Senator Hester?
Were there, I mean, this was the one, I think, where we had it late at night and there was like 5 or 6 people who were all opposed. Anyways, you mentioned that there were 2 groups that have removed their opposition. So my question is, are there other groups in opposition who are now no longer in opposition?
I mean, I will say that much of the bill. So those were the only, so NIOP and the MBIA were the only people who testified in opposition to the bill. And both of them have removed their opposition.
Do we have any further, was there any input from MDE, I guess was Senator Hester? They were just informational only.
They were just informational. They were informational, but their big concern was doing individual permits as opposed to allowing the general permit. So the general permit is, right, it's one that is written to generally cover sort of a category of activity, and it's much easier to sort of review and approve applications for a general permit rather than an individual permit is one that the department has to write sort of on the specifics of a location. They were concerned that requiring individual permits was going to massively increase their caseload. This takes all that out of there. There is no requirement to do individual permits. So their concerns have been addressed.
Okay, any further discussion about the amendments? Senator Brooks.
But you said all of the penalty provisions were removed?
All of the heightened ones under the
heightened
bill, the current, it would just be the current ones that are already in current law.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Chair.
Additional questions on, again, just on the amendments for now? Okay, well, that said, does anybody want to move the amendments? Senator Brooks, is there a second? Senator Augustine? All in favor of the amendments, raise your hand. All opposed? Got the bill as amended on the table. Is there a motion? Okay, we've got a motion favorable and a second. All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed? Senate Bill 471 carries. Now we're going to go to Senate Bill 482, Senate Lewis Young's bill. And we're going to go Stacy.
Senate Bill 482, Janet L. Hoffman Loan Assistance Repayment Program, Mental Health Professionals in Public Schools. This bill expands eligibility for the Janet L. Hoffman Loan Assistance Repayment Program to include mental health professionals who have received a graduate, professional, or undergraduate degree from any accredited college or university, been employed in a public school in the state for at least 1 year, and otherwise meet the eligibility criteria of the program. The bill requires that the Maryland Higher Education Commission Office of Student Financial Assistance publicize the program to eligible mental health professionals. There is one amendment offered by the bill's sponsor, Senator Lewis Young. The amendments are on page 45 and the reprint begins on page 47. This amendment will alter the eligibility provisions to provide that mental health professionals must be either employed by a county school system or a local health department to provide school health services through an agreement with a county board of education, and extends the service obligation to 2 years to at least 2 years from 1 year.
Okay, Senator Lewis Young, do you want to add anything to what Stacy said before we take questions? Okay, questions for Stacy or the sponsor, Senator Watson?
And so we had another bill that dealt with school-based health centers, I think it was, and there was a the bill basically said each county will have one of these in their specific district. And I remember answering questions about it because we had 4. I didn't know if this was duplicative or not because those health centers did include mental health. Did I get it wrong, or should I only be considering bills that are brought up for a vote? Because I don't think we voted on that, right?
Health centers are a different entity altogether.
Right.
This is essentially a loan repayment program for mental health professionals that are either employed by a school, they work in the school full time, or often schools can't afford to do it through the public school system. So they have an agreement with a local health department and they provide the school health services through the local health department. School-based health centers are like standalone entities and they employ healthcare professionals in them. So this is not duplicative of whatever was in that particular bill.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, Senator Lewis Young.
And the main goal of this bill was to try to provide attraction and retention incentive for people to go into the field since there's such a shortage.
Okay, any further discussion about the amendment? Okay, seeing none, Madam Sponsor, you want to move your amendment?
I'll move the bill. I mean, the amendment.
Is there a second? Senator Watson, all in favor of the amendment from the sponsor, raise your hand. All opposed? Okay, the amendment carries. Now we've got the bill as amended on the table. Is there a motion? Senator Young, second. Senator Watson, all in favor of this piece of legislation as amended, Senate Bill 482, raise your hand. Okay, the bill carries. Next up, we're going to go to the Cecil County Senator, Senate Bill 517. We have seen this bill before and we're going to talk about it again. So we're going to go to April.
All right, so Senate Bill 517, Port of Deposit State Historical Park included areas. As a reminder, this is an emergency bill that, as introduced, modifies existing provisions which require the Port of Deposit State Historical Park to consist of specified portions of the Bainbridge Naval Training Center by repealing requirements the portion of the site be not less than 120 acres and include the historic Tome School. Bill also repeals a requirement that the Bainbridge Development Corporation transfer the specified properties to the Department of Natural Resources by June 1st, 2023, and instead authorizes that transfer. There are amendments in your bill packet that are fairly extensive that begin on page 51, and the reprint begins on page 55. So the amendments strike the alterations to the properties that must be included in the Port of Deposit State Historical Park. So under the amended bills, that park would still have to include the Tome School, Snow Hill, and the adjacent woodland. But it also maintains that striking of the acreage requirements. The amendments alter the composition of the Port Deposit Park Advisory Committee. And requires the Department of Natural Resources to report to the General Assembly on the findings and recommendations of that advisory committee on or before September 1st, 2024. It returns the requirement that the Bainbridge transfer the property specified in the bill to the department, but extends the deadline for doing so to June 1st, 2025. Requires the department to preserve any property that is not included in the state park to preserve in perpetuity for its archaeological, historical, and cultural significance in accordance with recommendations of the advisory group. And finally, authorizes an appropriation of at least $400,000 to the department in fiscal 2025 to conduct a phase 1 archaeological survey and soil study for the Tome School and Snow Hill sites. So big picture, what the amendments are doing is they maintain the requirement that this park be created at some point in the future, and that include generally those 3 sites that have been specified, but sort of stays agnostic on the exact size of the park, reconvenes this advisory group with a few additional members, requires them to look at the things they were supposed to look at before, but also to consider other options for preserving these sites in perpetuity. Extends the deadline, but still requires Bainbridge to transfer the entirety of that property, still has the acreage requirements there to the department And then says that any of the property the department does not include in the park that would still have to be preserved in perpetuity in accordance with whatever that advisory group comes up with. And then finally has that piece that's allowing for the study, the archaeological study and the soil study of those properties, which would be an important first step in just determining what is appropriate to be included in the state park and what would actually be entailed in actually creating a state park out of those properties.
Senator Gallion.
So, thank you. So the intent was it basically went back to like it was under the state parks bill a year ago, except it adds 2 years, reconvenes the work group or the advisory group. We added like a highway archaeological person to that group at the request of DNR. So it's, it's pretty big changes from what we talked about last time. The only question I had was, and also it adds supposed to add May funding for the archaeological and soil testing. First, we were doing archaeological. DNR requested also add in soil testing. There's some sort of testing there. It's already in the governor's budget, $150,000, my understanding. This would be $400,000. I think it should be probably a May and FY24 though, correct? That way we can do it sooner. Or does it have to be
Can't do that
25?
in this bill.
Okay.
If you want to do that, you have to do it through a budget amendment.
Okay, okay.
But in this bill, we can only speak to what happens in
Right,
2025.
And I'm gonna work to try to get that sooner because in order to have a real true picture of what we have there, and especially there's a lot of talk about the Snow Hill site, we need that archaeological survey. This survey would also cover the Tome School site as well, though. So once we have that, then we'll have the real, or as best as they could possibly get them, the boundaries for Snow Hill. We'll see exactly what's there. And then this advisory group can take that information and have a really good picture of what's going on there. It also give us time to talk with the Navy about that MOU issue and to see what we can do there. So the report, I think we put in I think you end up doing September 24. Basically, that should give us enough time to look at all this stuff, come up with a report, and then if we have to change something in that 2025 session, we would have wiggle room to do that. So in other words, if that report shows a lot of issues, we would come back in 2 years if we had to. So I think that pretty well covers it.
Senator Augustine.
Thank you, thank you. And Senator Gallion and I have been working on this together, just so that you know. The only thing that I was the survey. Is that, and you and I, we talked about the survey because that was a part of the archaeological part, remember? Because it wasn't clear whether or not the Snow Hill site was in fact, that whether or not there was a portion of the historic African-American site on the Tome School portion of the site. And then we talked about having that as a survey.
Right. So the archaeological study would cover that. That's why we added to have that's why we got the estimate from DNR to make sure they could do the archaeological survey on both the Tome School and the Snow Hill and that area. That way they could do the boundaries.
Right, but it doesn't, I'm saying like, it doesn't, just based on what was said, it doesn't say that.
Okay.
Bottom of page 57 into page 58.
Yep,
So
looking at it.
conduct a phase 1 archaeological survey and soil study for the Tome School and Snow Hill areas is
Okay.
that
All right,
okay?
okay. And then the other question that I had was why, and it's unfortunate Senator Washington is not here, because if you recall, she is the one who had expressed concern about changing the acreage discussion. She mentioned it in here. Why is that now changed? Because again, the things that we talked about was the other stuff, but basically, and you've done almost all of it, but just not that one, just not that one part.
So my understanding is, and April could add on to this, but the parts that were all added back in that are going to be turned over, if you combine all those, that acreage is going to be somewhere in that neighborhood of that 120 to 150 acres. This way, we're not so prescriptive saying it has to be, say if it ends up being 115 acres between those three sites, it would be covered. Am I interpreting that correctly?
It also, so the acreage requirement remains in the, so if you go on page 57, it
Which line?
remains, so
Where?
page 57, lines 17 and 18.
Okay.
So we're still saying that, at least in this bill, subject to whatever gets decided in future years, that Bainbridge has to turn over all of that property to the department. I think the broader question that has been raised through this whole process and the department has raised is, how much of this site is appropriate to include in a state park versus being preserved in some other way. The bill does still say that the state park has to include Snow Hill, Tome School, and adjacent conservation land, but we're, at least in this formulation of the bill, is remaining a little bit agnostic as to the scope.
Okay, but then how do those two things then work together then? Like, I don't understand how those two things work together.
You can,
Or
you
let me
can
say it to you
transfer the
differently.
whole property to the
but
department.
let me
They
say
can
it this
create
way.
a state park.
So let me
They
say
might
it-
exclude an area that is unsafe from the state park.
And
but still
that's
preserve it.
that's fine, but then based on this, what they could do is create a park that's 1 acre. Right? The way that you have it written here, you could create a 1 acre, you could designate 1 acre as being the park, the way you have it. And the rest of it just, designated in some other way. Is that,
That would technically be possible. I would just
and I have very
say
little
that
faith
there is
in
an
the-
advisory committee.
And I have very little faith based on some things that I've talked to and seen. I have very little faith right now in, which is why we are where we are right now, in all seriousness. And so that's where I got concerned, where you set a situation where that could end up being the outcome. Because there are people there, but let me not say that. That could be the outcome. That could be what it would end up being, the way that this is written, and I'm not comfortable with that.
And then that's
So
for
we
the
can,
committee to
we can
decide.
amend the amendment to put whatever acreage
Okay?
on that.
Yeah, I mean, that was it, because that's exactly what we
Yeah,
said, and
that's
which is
fine,
what I was
fine.
comfortable with. That way we, and then, by the way, here's the thing, which is what I said all along, and I've continued to say. We'll have time to come back. I'm comfortable. I'm trying to work with it
Yeah. I
to
appreciate it.
give more time, to work it out and everything, but not to, sort of create this situation where we don't, where they do come back and say something like that, and then there's nothing I can do.
Here, just for my own clarification, April, so, because you just said there's time. So what happens if, I thought the alternative, if no bill passes, that becomes its own problem? What's the scenario? Let's say if there's, so the transfer has to happen.
The transfer has to happen. The concern of the department right now is that they have not had, their feeling is that they have not had time to fully investigate the site, that to turn this entire site into a state park as envisioned in last year's bill is going to require, their initial estimates are just tens of millions of dollars to deal with. It is a formal naval site. There is environmental contamination
Right,
concerns.
so
there
I
are
guess
safety
the
concerns.
point here, that alternative, I think we need to get something done here,
Sure.
so let's, yeah, I know 100%, I get it, and Sarah Washington will be here definitely because one of her big bills is next up, but
Right, and
yeah.
I take no position
No, I
on the
got you.
acreage. I'm just explaining it, but
And that's what we.
and that's-
what we-
Well, is there a way conceptually, is there a way?
just return the,
So,
just return the
so
the
if
current
we-
acreage
okay,
requirements.
so explain conceptual amendment here, so maybe we don't have to.
So
keep coming
the
back.
amendment to the amendment would just be if you go on page 56, lines 8 and 9. So where that's crossed out now, we would just return that language. So it'd say port of deposit consists of a portion of the training center site. measuring not less than 120 acres and not more than 150 acres.
Does everybody get that conceptual amendment, which may resolve our issues here? Okay, all in favor? Okay, we've got a motion from Senator Simonaire. Is there a second on this conceptual amendment? Senator Augustine, all in favor of the conceptual amendment, which will be formalized before we, yeah.
Actually, we're gonna put my name down as a co-sponsor on it. at
Okay,
that point.
very good. Okay, with that,
Happy birthday.
That's exactly what I was. looking for.
Augustine on as a
On my
co-sponsor.
birthday.
Okay, we're good. This is excellent. So now got the bill on the table as amended from Cecil County. Is there a motion? Senator Gallion, is there a second from Senator
Second.
Augustine?
Yes.
All in favor, raise your hand. All opposed. And finally, Senate Bill 517 moves forward.
Work on it.
We're next going to Senate Bill 559. Stacy, Senator Gazzoni.
Senate Bill 559, Education, Maryland Meals for Achievement in Classroom Breakfast Program Annual Appropriation. So this is the first this committee is seeing this bill because this was primarily in budget and tax, and this committee is secondary on it. This bill requires the governor to include in the annual budget bill $12,050,000 for the Maryland Meals for Achievement in Classroom Breakfast Program. This essentially doubles the mandatory appropriation beginning in fiscal year 2025. Budget and tax voted this favorable with amendment unanimously, and the amendment was just sponsors.
Okay, any motion to adopt the sponsor amendments that were put on by Budget and Tax? Senator Simonaire, is there a second? Senator Augustine, all in favor of those B&T sponsor amendments, raise your hand. Now we've got the bill on the table from the, does anybody else here want to be added as a co-sponsor? Raise your hand, okay. Here, I'm going to go on. We got Watson, we got. Okay, we good? Okay, with that, let's move to the bill as amended with all those sponsors. Senate Bill 559, is there a motion? Second from Senator Watson, all in favor of Senate Bill 559 with all those sponsors, raise your hand. All opposed, Senate Bill 559 carries. Gonna next go to, we've got 585 and 610, which are in the same space, and I think you have on your table, if we can get Senator Washington, somebody could summon Senator Washington here.
585 is different than.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
585, I apologize. I skipped to the next one. Senate Bill 585, Senator Hester, apologize on that one. Stacy.
Senate Bill 585, Career and Technical Education Committee alterations. This bill increases the number of members of the Career and Technical Education Committee jointly appointed by the Governor, President of the Senate, and Speaker of the House of Delegates from 6 to 8, and it expands representation on the committee to include skilled trade organizations and career colleges for a specified purpose. Finally, the bill expands the CTE committee's duties to include developing a list of skilled trade organization and career college programs and share the list with guidance counselors and public schools for distribution to students. To do so, the CTE committee may create advisory structures to ensure essential input from skilled trade organizations and career colleges. There are no amendments.
Okay, is it favorable on the table? Your second from Senator Augustine. Senator Hester, you want to add anything about the bill?
This committee voted on it unanimously last year, so I just moved the bill.
Okay, we have already a motion and a second. All in favor of the, yeah, sure, Senator Kagan.
Thank you. Stacy, in the hearing packet, the school guidance counselors asked for a one-word amendment. Did we take that or not take that? Senator Hester, page 4, line 24, strike guidance and replace it with school. Is that something that you looked at or considered?
I did not look at it.
Can we take a moment if it's a reasonable one-word amendment?
Okay, we could, or we could
Or
ponder it
not?
before the floor and offer as a floor amendment, but if you could let's take a minute if you want to look at it, but let's not take too much time to look
No.
at that one word. We could do a floor amendment that would accomplish the
All
same
right,
thing.
it's
But
Senator
on-
Hester, it's your bill.
Yeah.
You take a look.
Just like read their letter. Did they say why?
They do.
I see. Yes, let's just
The more
do it.
updated and correct terminology is school counselor, thus we would request a technical amendment, page 4, line 24, strike guidance and replace with school.
I
So
would-
rather than guidance counselor, call it school counselor.
That's fine with me.
Okay, you're going to move that technical
Technically, I would like to move the
largely
technical
technical.
amendment.
Okay, is there a second from Senator Kagan?
Aye.
There
yes,
is. All in favor of that slight modification of the bill, raise your hand. All opposed, that amendment carries. Now got the motion. Okay, let's go back. Motion, let's redo it again. Motion favorable from Simon Air, second Augustine. Got the bill on the table with that one small amendment. All in favor of Senate Bill 585 as amended, raise your hand. All opposed. Thank you for that catch, Senator Kagan. We're going to next move to Senate Bill 610, Senator Washington. Is anybody found? Okay, before we go to this final bill, which I really would like to vote, we're going to need to vote some time on. I'd like to give a minute to see if Senator Washington shows up. If not, we will go to the final bill. Okay. Well, why don't we, let's roll to Senate Bill 781 then. Yes,
I saw when I came to my desk that there's extensive amendments to the Senate Bill 781. I think you know that the concerns that the town of Ocean City and that we've raised on this issue, and I really believe that I need to take back anything that's being proposed, and I'd like to put a hold on this bill.
good. Respectfully, I think I said at the last time that, the criteria for the holds at this point are going to be much higher than they have been up until now. So why don't we at least do this, because I'm not inclined to just automatically give you the courtesy that I would have prior to this week, but if we could at least go through the amendments and get questions out there and then make some kind of decision then. But I do want to get the ball rolling on this bill. So we're going to go to Alexis. Just let's go through the amendments and yes.
Amendments, but we also plan to offer other amendments that are not prepared yet. Could we go through the amendments and then put a hold on the actual vote so we could come back and offer amendments that I need to actually coordinate with the town of Ocean City?
Okay, let me ponder that, because again, I think we are being expected to be, for lack of a better term, a lead on this committee product, and I don't want to delay this too much. I get where you're coming from. I will say that based on the experience on the floor today, floor amendments seem to be okay, even if weren't vetted in the committee. But that I don't want to throw that into the monkey wrench into it. Let's go through.
I think that I'm respectfully asking that, given this issue, that these amendments we'd like to bring to this committee, and I haven't had the courtesy of taking this back to the mayor and to others that have been involved.
Okay, let's see. Okay, one consideration again is, we are going to be here on Monday. That it may be an option here, but I mean, I'm not going to delay it a week for people to review. Okay, let's think through this. Let's start with the amendments, and then when we get to the end of the amendments with questions, we'll see how long we're here, and then we'll have that conversation after that. Okay, so Alexis, let's go through the amendments, take questions, and then in terms of your request, we will take that up at the end and see where we are. Okay.
All right, Senate Bill 781, generally on the bill, this,
Packet. I have
Yeah,
three
that's
versions. Can you just make
important to
sure we're all
clarify.
in the same place?
so the version that's outside of the packet is the one that we want to rely on.
Is it the one that says Senator Augustine or Senator Hester?
Both are to be included and considered separately.
Thank you very much.
So we can kind of overlook the ones that were included in the packet. Some additional changes were made, and they aren't going to be right as instructive with one minor caveat. So keep them close, but for the purpose of kind of running through, we can defer to those. So in general, the bill establishes requirements for offshore wind projects and offshore wind transmission projects, as well as energy procurement to accommodate the goal of 8,500 megawatts of offshore energy capacity by 2031. To achieve this, the bill requires a transmission study to be completed by the Public Service Commission or the PSC in consultation with Maryland Energy Administration and PJM Interconnection. This analysis is due by July 1st, 2024. The bill requires the Public Service Commission to begin to issue solicitations for offshore wind transmission facilities by December 1st, 2024, and outlines the specific considerations to be included in those proposals and the criteria by which the Public Service Commission shall evaluate them. The bill articulates the scope of transmission-related project applications as well. Sure.
Literally follow along.
Okay. So so we don't actually have the bill itself, but we can start at Senator Hester's reprint. Yes. So right, Senator Hester's reprint. So as mentioned, I think it may be a good idea to just kind of coordinate between the bill and the reprint itself. So we're looking at Senator Hester's reprint. On page 2, we have the definitions of offshore wind transmission projects and qualified offshore wind projects. For the purposes of this transmission study, offshore wind transmission projects are important and integral because that is where the proposals will occur, as well as that procurement. Qualified offshore wind projects are modified under the amendment, but not under the bill, to specifically have the requirement that these projects are at least 10 miles off of the coast of the state. So that's important on page 2. Additionally, these projects will contemplate transmission projects as well. Page 2 of the bill / reprint. Yep, on the top it should say bill page 2 of 18. So so on the top right corner, it should say bill page 2. Page 2. Most of the remaining pages are and so make sure we're looking at Senator Hester at the top of these. Most of the remaining pages deal with current projects under round 1 and round 2 of offshore wind development, both of which aren't considered as heavily now since we're embarking upon a new round. But on page 4, most of this is specific to current law. On page 5, the bill and the amendments that don't modify this, but it expands the scope of community benefit agreements that will be required in contemplation or in connection with these offshore wind projects and the transmission projects. So we have mounds upon mounds of current law that applies to these projects that have been conducted in the past and the collective wind projects to be accomplished. Sure.
Sorry, do you want to go through the whole thing, or is it okay if we ask questions when you're in that section?
That's
Mr.
fine.
Chair?
Yeah, why don't we, as she goes through, if there's a specific question, when she makes a point, why don't we take the question then as opposed to waiting to the end? I think that would be best.
Thank you. If I could, I'm on page 5 of 18, lines 24 and 25. Just quick, a proposal selected by the commission. So first off, the commission is the PSC, the Public Service Commission.
Mhm.
Selected by, is there a real clear definition what the vote needs to be, what the process needs to be? And again, this is new to many of us. If you
So-
could just clarify.
Yeah, on the vote, my understanding is that it would have to be a majority of the commissioners. The criteria that is included in the bill are mandates that they, have to include, some of which they're authorized to include, but their actual vote making process isn't contemplated here. But my thinking is that it's a majority of folks to determine which projects are
Hey,
awarded and.
Alexis, just to clarify, we want to make sure everybody knows, are you talking about the bill or the amendments? right now?
So,
So like,
yeah,
just so
that's
everybody,
important.
right, so
So,
just
right,
tell us where you are. Is it the amendments or the, no, I get it, but I think she was going back and forth a little bit here. So,
so I'm looking on the amendments. So I'm walking folks through the bill reprint as amended by Senator Hester's amendments. The portions, if it's most helpful, the portions that you all have questions about, I'll articulate whether that is a result of the reprint or if that was incorporated into the bill draft. The selected piece was incorporated into the amendments. That was under the bill draft. It was a proposal filed and approved. So the language of filed and approved versus selected should be deemed a very technical one. Approved versus selected is a change made throughout.
Just to be in the weeds here, because I've only worked with the PSC on 911 stuff and not on energy
Mhm.
stuff. So selected, do their selections get approved by the Board of Public Works? Do they go anywhere else? Or is it a 3-2 majority that's gonna dictate this vendor?
So the proposals themselves, before we get to the procurement purview, which is going to be a little separate. So proposal, then we get to DGS's role, which incorporates the Board of Public Works and their very nuanced and specific approval. Just to get the proposals out there, that is specific to the Public Service Commission, which, as I understand it, should be a majority vote based off of a proceeding that has a quorum.
That's a lot of power hypothetically in one human's purview. And it's not a super majority, it's just a majority. So literally it could be a 3-2 vote. I'm just, Senator Hester is, and you or other people here are the experts. I'm just asking the questions. So Mr. Chair, I don't know what you think of that.
okay, what I'd like to do, okay, let's identify the issues and then we can, sort of discuss them, but I want to get through what all the issues and the questions, and then we can sort of come back to some rather than getting too bogged down, because there's a lot of stuff here. So why don't you just keep going? And that's one issue that Senator Kagan has raised.
So on page 7, as mentioned time and time again, most of this is statutory language that is already embedded into the code. Subsection F on bill page 7 of 18, lines 35 through 37, weave in the proposal and procurement or the proposals of these offshore wind facilities by requiring those facilities to be subject to community benefit agreements as well. So that's one expansion of the bill. That's an additional expansion that generally isn't touched by the amendments. However, those community benefit agreements, the substance of them is tailored quite a bit between the bill that's drafted and the amendment process. So under the original bill, the community benefit agreements that the projects had to be, and the labor groups that surrounded the projects were required to incorporate collective bargaining, domestic preferences for goods, and quote, skilled local labor. So I wouldn't say narrow in scope, but it's been heavily expounded upon under the amendments. So particularly the community benefit agreements now have to include some type of language that protects the day-to-day labor environment, to include protections against strikes, lockouts, to make sure that labor practices are followed, to guarantee that the work performed is represented with labor organizations. So any thoughts on the expanded provisions for those community benefit agreements and the touch points with labor organizations are the same thing? And so I mentioned that was on page 7, but it actually goes on to page 9 as well. Page 12, from 9 to 12, we're talking codified language. So under the last set of projects that PSC has undergone in round 1 and round 2, US Winds projects and Skipjack's projects, incorporated in the order for approval, there had to be this assurance that 80% of any federal and state incentives that they garnered were passed through towards the ratepayers as a way to provide equity, but it was a condition upon the approval for both of those projects. Under this bill, looking prospectively to this upcoming round of projects, there will be a carve out from this requirement for developers to have to pass through to ratepayers 80% of those incentives if that incentive came from the Federal Inflation Reduction Act just passed last year. If the developer shows that there is a sufficient need for this exception from this requirement. If it's proven that the exemption will not lead to affordability challenges to ratepayers, and if it can be proven, another labor point, that 15% of the construction hours and repair work exists by or is completed by qualified apprentices, which is defined under federal law. All right.
Keep going.
All right. So on this piece, we're looking specifically at the study and the receipt of proposals. So it requires, under the bill, it requires the commission to consult with the Maryland Energy Administration and PJM Interconnection to conduct this study. And now there was a large question that arose about the role and the scope of the Public Service Commission in connection to FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, if I'm getting the acronym correct, and PJM Interconnection. So the bill contemplated the study, the solicitation of the proposal, the modification of the proposals, the evaluation of the proposals would come through PSC in a consultation role with PJM. However, most of the amendments defer that authority, oversight, and purview to PJM. So specifically, the language says under line 10 on page 12, that in order to meet these goals of 8,500 megawatts, this study will require the commission, in consultation with MEA, to request that PJM Interconnection conducts this analysis of these projects. And so
Yes, Senator Hester.
If we could just slow down just a
Oh,
touch
sorry.
more and you could be clear which,
Oh,
I mean, I think,
slow down.
and I'm the bill sponsor. so
Oh, okay.
just let us
Sorry,
know
I was trying
which-
to gauge,
which
shut the
page-
room a bit.
which page you're on and which line,
Okay.
because in the reprint, like there's 2 page 12s. So just.
Okay, so this is our
Take-
first page 12, right? So let's go back just a little bit. So we're finishing up on page 11. Last word on that page is, and last words are and procedures to the commission. Then we move to page 12. There's a big chunk of text under subsection K1 that talks about that begins with round 1 or developer of a round 1 offshore wind project or round 2 offshore wind project. Then we go down and the language under subsection 7-704.3 B has quite a few mark-throughs, and the mark-throughs reflect the fact that instead of PSC conducting this analysis, the PSC will request PJM to conduct this transmission system analysis. Additionally, the amendments require a consultation with other states that are served by the PJM interconnection as a part of this study, and specifies or requires the Public Service Commission to request specific analyses from the PJM interconnection. And those are specific to, we're now past page 12 on a page that is unlisted because it was not contemplated in the original bill. But the analyses that PJM conducts has to be focused on avoiding outages, mitigating costs and risks of permits, has to be focused on utilizing and leveraging the existing infrastructure as a way to reduce costs. So the amendments expound upon the scope and focus of PJM's analysis. There are other parts that are reflective of that change, where we see the strikeout on further the commission. Right, well, that would essentially be the only one. We're talking the onus of this analysis is now on PJM. So the date of the due date rather for a report about this analysis is the same. However, the deadline for the request to be made for solicitations is pushed back from December 1, 2024 to July 1, 2025. So solicitation under the current bill began or was due to begin on December 1, 2024, or sorry, not due to begin. Right, so the date by which it had to begin. So we're not looking at that as the absolute beginning point, but actually the end point. So anyway, for what it's worth, that's pushed back from December 1 of 2024 to July 1 of 2025. And that's the date that these solicitations for the proposals will begin, that PJM, that the study that PJM conducted will be based upon. Under the amendments, and this is different from Senator Augustine's amendment, to the extent that I'll talk about them in this linear fashion, where the bill has the Public Service Commission in this role of issuing the solicitations. Senator Augustine's amendments authorized, Senator Hester's, amendments authorized PJM to begin and take the lead on these solicitations. Senator Augustine's defers that authority to issue and evaluate and modify those solicitations to the PJM exclusively. So we have under the original bill, which may not necessarily matter as much, but under the bill, PSC is issuing this solicitation. Under Senator Hester's amendments, the PSC may still be able to issue these solicitations, may still be able to modify these solicitations, may still be able to evaluate the solicitations / proposals. However, under Senator Augustine's amendment, that authority is solely and exclusively governed by PJM. So page 13 in Senator Hester's amendments, which will be different from the page 13 in Senator Augustine's amendments to reflect this change, authorizes the Public Service Commission to either make specific points for the proposal. So when we talk about what the proposals, and this gets to Senator Kagan's question about like discretion of what these proposals have to have. So this is the requirements that these proposals should include. It also prescribes what the commission has to look for. Under the Senator Hester amendments, the PSC can make that determination or PJM can make that determination. Under Senator Augustine's amendments, the PJM interconnection solely makes that determination for the criteria to be governed by these proposals, which of course makes sense because they are under the Augustine amendments, just through this progression, they're the ones that would be making the determination, and under Senator Hester's amendments, they would have the authority to, but that authority would still be retained with the Public Service Commission. Under both, the proposal, the mandates or pieces, and the pieces that the proposals are required to consider are expanded. So now, under the amended bills, both Senator Hester's and Senator Augustine's, there has to be a focus on ensuring that the bidding process is competitive, and ensuring that environmental standards are focused on or contemplated in some way. Or just rather addressed generally. Page 14 is untouched by the amendments, and this essentially allows these proposals of the plans that these developers decide on or, function through to make use of federal money. And there are several lists of those federal mechanisms. So federal IRA, Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and Department of Energy generally. So the solicitation process, despite the entity that is foreseeing it, whether that is PSC, whether that is PSC or PJM, or whether that is PJM, the process requires a pre-solicitation, a pre-qualification process before the developer companies are able to engage in this development proposal process to ensure that essentially the companies are financially solvent and technically apt. Under Senator Hester's agreement, under Senator Hester's amendments, the requirement for the Public Service Commission to consider unnecessary upgrade costs to existing transmission is removed. That required criteria in the commission's selection / approval process is untouched by Senator Augustine's amendment, with the caveat that the PJM interconnection would be the one that would be requiring these proposals to look this way. Okay, so now on page 15, beginning on lines 16 through, I'm gonna say 16 through 19, I'm just reminding myself here. So under the original bill, a proposal had to be, well, it was encouraged that a proposal be selected by July 1 of 2026. However, there's a carve out saying that in the event those requirements aren't satisfactory to the Public Service Commission / PJM interconnection, that process could continue without a proposal being exhausted, right? Like, only approve these projects if they meet the criteria, but if they don't, we'll kind of cut it off. So the deadline for approvals to be made to these companies is now pushed back under both amendments to begin by December 1, 2027, instead of July 1 of 2026. Senator Hester's amendments and Senator Augustine's amendments authorize the development of these projects, or the projects themselves, to be exempt from CPCN citing an approval authority. And that is an exemption within both of those amendments. Also on that page, it specifies that conditions can be placed on these projects, which isn't a deviation from how projects are currently contemplated. Under current law, the PSC has the authority to place adoptions or to place conditions on the orders that they give and the projects that they approve, and that is conforming. So after are there questions?
No, and guys, okay, well, let's go through the end, and then I have thought about Senator Carrozza's request, but let's go through what we got, and then I've got some thoughts on all this.
Okay. So there's a requirement that the commission coordinate with several listed entities. That's on page 16 of 18, from lines 15 through 20. So after a proposal is selected, then begins the process of collaborating with intrastate entities and interstate entities. So able to collaborate with other states who've already done this work, required to collaborate with the Maryland Energy Administration, required to collaborate with FERC in the development of these proposals. Under Senator Hester's amendments, that coordination and collaboration shall also apply not just to the development generally, but also to the construction of these offshore facilities. Under Senator Augustine's amendments, that consultation inter and intrastate only applies to the entities listed for projects generally, but not the construction and development portion piece. On DGS procurement, which is a new section, at the bottom of page 16 of 18, section 7704.4, subsection B. Under the original bill, there was a window through which the Department of General Services was able to solicit bids for the procurement of these projects. Under both amendments, Senator Hester's and Senator Augustine's, that timeline is removed. The method by which procurement occurs within the Department of General Services is also modified under both amendments. Instead of an invitation for bids, then we do have an expert from DGS that is available to distinguish the difference where necessary. But instead of the invitation for bids, the procurement has to be competitive sealed procurement solicitations. And that touches on this competitive process and the redaction of proprietary information, which is also required to be included in the proposal, and I may have left that portion out. Under the bill, the Department of General Services is required to consider in the power purchase agreements that they procure environmental factors. Those environmental factors are expanded upon under both amendments to include not just the social cost of greenhouse gas emissions, but also to consider environmental issues like fisheries, mitigating other environmental harms, and protecting wildlife and habitats. The amount that must be procured through the contemplated procurement mechanism under the original bill invitation for bids, under the amended bill competitive sealed procurements, is also reduced from 8 million megawatt hours of capacity to 5 million megawatt hours of energy. What that translates into is an expert question, and we have some folks here who can help discern the difference in that decrease of 3 million megawatt hours of energy. Additionally, under the original bill, if there were additional credits that haven't been dispensed with or retired after these power purchase agreements have been entered into, they're required to be sold on the wholesale market. That piece, and let me confirm really quick. All right. Okay, so that piece is retained within the bill. The bill under both amendments says that if all of the renewable energy goals that we have within the state is satisfied through these power purchase agreements, then the state itself is exempt from renewable energy portfolio standard. So additionally, the date by which contracts have to be entered into under the original bill was April 30th, 2005. So it was a final, the bidding window time was 180 days, but the actual procurement for these finalized contracts had to be completed by April 30th, 2025. Under both amendments, that deadline is pushed back. So the state is authorized under both, it was an authorization, this bill isn't mandating these procurements, it's not mandating contracts occur or be entered into. But it's saying that if they are, has to be pushed back to September 1st, 2025. So we're talking a 5-month difference originally. Also, in the event there is an unforeseen circumstance, there is a caveat saying that that deadline for which these procurement contracts can be entered into may also be changed. Back on the labor piece. So on page 18, beginning at line 15, and then there's quite a bit of text that does not have numbers because all of this is new. So there has to be this attestation included within the power purchase agreement, similar to the language that was incorporated in the community benefit agreement, saying that labor practices will be sound, strikes will not occur erratically, and there will be a labor peace agreement in force or in place through the power purchase agreement in the connection with the developer and the labor organizations. Basically. Right, and the language says prohibiting strikes and lockouts, et cetera. So I think it's a little softer, but it's essentially getting to the same thing. And a reporting requirement is also due under the bill, under the two amendments. It's an annual report beginning December 31st, 2024. That corresponds to information on minority-owned, women-owned, and veteran-owned businesses. And this report is to be completed by the commission, submitted to the General Assembly on best efforts taken to incorporate minority-owned, women-owned, veteran-owned businesses, the percentage of contractors and subcontractors that fall within those identifying groups in general. And again, an annual report on those metrics. Finally, for employment options or offices are not quite authorized. There's uncodified language suggesting that the General Assembly intends to create 4 positions totaling $3.5 million within the Public Service Commission. The uncodified language also authorizes the governor to appropriate $3.5 million for those provisions within the Public Service Commission. And I'm just going to check to see if I missed anything.
Okay, so,
On
yeah,
the end part.
yeah, sure, and then I'll, yes, go on.
So
Senator
you're
Gallo.
talking about like $3 or $4 million for like 4 positions. Well, can you explain what does that entail? Like what positions are they? What are they doing?
So this is this is that last
Sure, that might be a
page.
good, before I tell you what we're gonna do here, Lisa, we do have in the pack, I see Lisa Smith from the Public Service Commission, you're talking about, pins in the Public Service Commission, and then Evan, are you back there? I think, sorry, just come up here, and before we get any further here, this is, I think, how we're gonna play this, and I want her to answer. Look, this complicated bill, and I'm not comfortable, us doing anything until people really get where they need to be in terms of understanding the bill. So to Mary Beth, Senator Carrozza's request, we're going to take this bill up, not today, but on Tuesday. Okay, so that should give you time to do what you need to do. But in the meantime, since we're here, and then between now and then, let's get some questions. I mean, Senator Kagan had a question. But we got a couple of folks here from the PSC and Evans from outside the PSC who's been involved with this project. So here's a good opportunity. So let's start back on the PIN issue, and maybe Lisa, maybe you could even, if you're from the PSC, maybe, or Alexis, either way.
So I'll just frame it with, it's for the analyses to be conducted and the study. So the analysis/study, how those 4 are divvied up or what the annual amount is, that part I'm not certain about.
And thank you, Mr. Chair, for the invitation. Thank you to Alexis for all of your hard work on this bill. Really appreciate your efforts.
Be $3.5 million dollars divided by 4 employees, in other words. Okay, I think she explained that. That's what I was kind of raising an alarm. I just wasn't sure. So thank you, Alexis, for answering.
Senator, thank you for the question. The fiscal note was based on the cost in New Jersey based on their experience. We also saw the scope here a little broader So we put 4 employees, they had 3 employees just for this effort. It was a tremendous effort for the solicitations, reviewing all the solicitations, doing the study. And the 3.5 million would be for consultant fees, completely separate and apart from the positions. I hope that answers the question.
Okay. And just any other questions of this group? Yeah, Sarah Watson.
Yeah, so this this is pretty challenging. So new subject matter with 2 versions, trying to put it all together in your head is challenging. So I appreciate the extra time. Mr.
Let me
Chair.
just say, I think between now and when we meet again, I'm gonna probably try to put together some kind of chart.
Yeah,
you know,
that would be great.
amendments. And so again, I'd like to get some issues out on the table just for some discussion.
All right, just to try to summarize everything in my head. So this bill is about a study and procurement, right? The study is all about transmission. And the procurement is about the turbines, or is that about both, the transmission and the turbines?
Yes, the study is about the transmission planning, which would be conducted by PJM. And the solicitation would be done by PJM in conjunction with PSC for the solicitation for the transmission project.
So the
And then-
transmission is also going to include adjoining states, in which case, if they want to jump on board, that could drive the total cost down because they would be able to have benefit of the power that we're generating. Is that fair?
Yes, Senator, the bill requires the PSC to endeavor to communicate with other states and get their buy-in if possible.
I kind of missed because we were jumping from PSC to PJM, PSC to PJM. I'm assuming one entity is responsible for the procurement, the solicitation. The other component is responsible for what? The oversight? Just break up the responsibilities of the 2 different organizations because they were thrown around quite a bit and I think I missed it.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have seen all of the amendments, so I'll defer to Alexis on the final language. But my understanding is it would be the oversight of the PSC, correct? The PSC would be involved with PJM taking the lead on the solicitation. Is that fair?
Right.
PSC oversight, PJM doing the actual solicitation.
So that depends on which amendments we're on. So the actual solicitation of the proposals, before we get to procuring the methods, the procuring is staying within the state.
Okay.
The procurement goes through DGS.
Yeah.
So the actual scope of the projects, what the proposals contemplate is by the PSC requesting that the PJM does the actual study and writes up what everything has to incorporate and include, right? So it's this PSC/PJM under Senator Hester's amendments.
Yeah.
But under Senator Augustine's amendments, that is completely a request to PJM to conduct and do.
Okay, and Mr. Chair, I'm going to assume we're going to get eventually we're going to get to a point of comparison, just like we did with the Hester Washington school bills, right?
Yeah, I think that's the goal, again, seeing how this is all, kind of laying out. Again, I want everybody to make sure they're understanding. So yes, we're gonna do everything we can to make this user friendly.
Right,
but,
I get it, but
yeah.
when we get that, and I already saw the same thing from going through the virtual schools, is that, I'm not knowledgeable enough to know which one is better than the other. There's pros and cons depending on who leads and who follows and all of those things. Just trying to understand the full breadth, who really has the experience to do one task versus the other, which differentiates the bills, I think, in some cases.
Just to be clear, we don't have different bills. We do have different set of amendments.
I'm sorry.
Right. There's only one bill. It's
one bill, different amendments.
Right.
Okay. I'm getting there. I appreciate it.
The other issue, there's actually 2 bills, Hester Washington bills. This is one bill, a Hester bill, just different amendments.
Okay,
But-
thank you.
And Sarah Augustine, you want to clarify a little bit? Yeah.
Clarify, I want us to just sort of step back. I think it's important that we just step back a little bit and of what this is actually doing. Right? So we real basic, we're gonna build wind out there in the water. We got to get the power from there onshore. like really, like really simple. Like that's, and now what we're talking about is how do we do that in the most efficient way? How do we do that best? Okay, so we have some different things that we're talking about where we're trying to figure out the best way to do that. Those transmission lines at the end of the day, that is a part of the PJM grid infrastructure. We just talking about building this grid infrastructure to be able to get this power that we're endeavoring. Well, I'm not going to use the word endeavor. We're going to pull that word endeavor out, but we're going to try to get that power from out there back on shore, right? And then we're also saying, not only that, like we're going to buy this power, we're going to buy this power. And we're going to lead by example, that we want to be the ones who are going to, be leaders in renewable energy. And we're going to do that by having the state purchase power that's coming from there. We'll get into a contract for that. And, that's like the big picture of what we're doing. Now, there's different things that we got to work on as far as like the best way to do that, making sure that it makes sense from for different criteria that we may have for the project. But that's really what this is. We have a commitment to we want to and make it more efficient. So let's just go back to that too. The idea was, if we create this significant transmission corridor out into the water, instead of having them all over the place and, it's like they could be here and they'd be there, we got this one really solid, strong way to bring the power that is available out there in the water back in here. And we do it in the most efficient way by doing this, by having this one corridor to bring the power in. And now it's just like, okay, but then there are different potential ways to do it. And that's what you're seeing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and if I could just ask my last question for Senator Carrozza, the cost. So it's interesting you refer to the cost in terms of megawatts, not dollars, right? So the solicitation goes out, here's a price tag, it's going to cost us to do it. Who pays for this thing?
I'm sorry, Senator, is the question about the transmission project cost?
Both pieces are going to cost a heck of a lot of money. I'm just trying to figure out how much burden is really going to go back to the ratepayer, or is that not a function of this? That's what I'm concerned about. And those are the calls that I've been getting about this Herculean effort that we're going to undertake.
Senator, I believe the study will address those factors. And as you mentioned as well, if other states will participate, you mentioned that was one factor that would reduce the cost to Maryland.
Precede any construction,
Correct.
even before the turbines and all that stuff goes, because the way I envision this, there are two big pieces. There's getting the power back home, and then there's the power generation. None of that will start until the transmission study is done.
That's right.
Okay.
The analysis from the study has to be included in that proposal before we even get to construction, interconnection and all that stuff.
Right, and Evan, if you want to add, and then just, again, this is not complete new model. A lot of this is modeled after what has taken place in New Jersey successfully. So I think they talk about costs. They would say that they actually saved $900 million or something by doing this, as opposed to all kinds of different transmission lines at different points offshore, et cetera. So there is an economic argument. Evan, would you want to just weigh in if you want us to just add anything to what Alexis or Lisa said just about these two prongs? Again, it's a procurement angle. There's a these are two separate things, but Sarah Augustine, I think, laid it out fundamentally, like the simplicity of the topic. The mechanics are a little more challenging.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for inviting me up, Senator. I'm Evan Vaughn. I'm Deputy Director of the Mid-Atlantic Renewable Energy Coalition. So we're an industry organization that represents offshore wind developers. Senator Watson, and I agree, Senator Augustine explained the general concept very well. Senator Watson, to your question about cost. So it is two different things. The transmission portion, so the power lines that are going to bring it from offshore to shore, that portion, the study would proceed first to evaluate what are the most cost-effective options. That would also be a competitive solicitation so that companies outside of the PJM PSC nexus would be able to propose competitive proposals that would be potentially cheaper than what PJM figures out through their studying. So there's that phase of the study, there's the solicitation for the lines, and then at the end of the day, the PSC is the one with the decision-making authority. And if they selected a project, then that would have a ratepayer cost associated with it, but they would be going in with their eyes wide open as far as what the cost and the benefits are as well. In the New Jersey instance, the total cost of bringing about 6,500 megawatts onshore was $1.1 billion, and the projected savings as opposed to doing that in a piecemeal fashion where every line comes in individually was $900 million. So that just gives you a sense of the scale, almost cut the price by half of accomplishing that. And then the offshore wind, this is sort of, I think of it as a middle term solution. So the near term solution is the projects that Maryland has already approved through the ORECs. This DGS procurement would come out of the general fund if those projects are selected. So that would not be a ratepayer cost at all. And then the long-term solution to get the state to its carbon decarbonization goals is that 8,500 megawatts. So you've already taken care of the near term. The DGS is a way to look at the medium term, and then the overall goal of 8,500 is the long term. I hope that answers and clarifies a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, let's, anybody quite, we got Senator Brooks and then Senator Carozza.
All right, thanks. Yeah, on the procurement side, I think I read where the state, we use something like 1.5 million megawatts average. So anything in over and well, that's where the PPA, the purchase power agreement, that's a 20-year agreement, I believe. Yeah.
That's right.
So, and that would, I guess DGS would be the one who come in the play to make that decision.
Right.
I'm saying any generation over and above that, would that be going back to PJM? Would they be using that excess to help mitigate our cost?
I believe that's the intent of the bill, Senator. And of course, the generation they would purchase would also be over and above what's already accounted for within the ORECs.
Right. Okay. All right. Good enough. And I see in here on page 17, line 7. We're saying procurement up to 5 million megawatts. Yeah, so that's I would think that's a little bit more than what we are using right now. So that's the intent. You want that expanded capacity, I guess.
Can you repeat that, Senator? Sorry.
Okay, yeah, on line 7, page 17, here we're saying to procure, well, initially between 1 million and then 800, 1 million and 8 million megawatts. Now it says up to 5 megawatts per hour annually.
Mhm.
That's what we're going to be procuring, I believe.
Right, up to,
Yeah,
that's right.
up to.
Each year.
Each year, yeah. So that right now it seems like that's greater than what we actually using. So I guess you want that excess capacity for.
Right,
Okay,
so,
okay.
right, and so trying to think on the question of this excess, because I'm not discerning whether it's like a U6 question or what we do with the like extra credits question.
If I could, Senator, I could speak
Go
to
for
that. So the idea would be, you're correct that the state currently uses about, just rounding up a little bit, 1.5 million megawatt hours a year to power all of its operations. So the idea that the sponsors, how they arrived at 5 million is that the existing lease areas offshore Maryland, so this is the Orsted and the US wind areas, those have some additional remaining capacity that could be built out into them. And so this is an industry calculation, but we assess that 5 million megawatt hours would be somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 megawatts of capacity. So that's distinct from energy, but 1,000 and 1,500 megawatts of capacity for offshore wind would produce about 5 million megawatt hours. And that's a factor of, the wind's not blowing all the time. The turbines sometimes have maintenance. So I'm assessing in those numbers about a 40% capacity factor. So that's actually pretty low. So basically this target in industry perspective would allow the existing lease areas to be filled out. Yep.
Okay, Senator Carozza, then Senator Hester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate it. Sounds like all of us are need to kind of be walked through this bill. And I want to go back to Senator Augustine's, he kind of laid it out there, but what it did when he broke it down prompted questions in each one of those steps. So my first part would be, you've got the transmission, how to move the power to the land. I'd like to know, and I understand the proposal, we want to make it more efficient, and that's why we're proposing this combination with other states. So I'd first like to understand on that transmission, if any others, what have other states done as if they've done this, and it was it one transmission? Did any of them combine? Who paid for that transmission going to land? So that's and then that's my first set. And then when it gets to land, I've got a couple more questions.
Do you want me to take? Sure. I'll just start off there because I think the question is mostly about other states, and New Jersey is part of our region, so I'm happy to speak about that. So what New Jersey did, just in a real concrete sense, is that they had this process where they looked at different competitive options and they selected one. And the project that they selected for transmission was a landing point, a single landing point that essentially allowed for 4 cables to slot into it. And so the power strip analogy is pretty apt there. So there's 4 different offshore wind projects plugging into that, or will plug into that transmission landing point. And then from there, the transmission solution that they selected also included the line from the shore to the closest viable portion of the broader electric grid. So a substation that would go onto the high voltage lines that go everywhere else in the state of New Jersey. So that, from just a very physical standpoint, is what New Jersey ended up selecting. So the offshore component in New Jersey's instance is still being paid for by the offshore wind developers. They just get to plug in to that power strip on the shore.
So the example you gave me was that they're doing the plug-in, but you said the developer is paying for that transmission line?
So the New Jersey ratepayers are paying for the portion from the power strip all the way back to the upgrades onto the existing power grid. So those are just the land-based power lines that go throughout New Jersey. The offshore wind developers are paying for the from the offshore wind farms to the collector station there on the shore. So that's one way that Maryland could approach it. The study is going to sort of reveal those different options. It could include offshore lines paid for by the ratepayer or not. It just depends on what the PSC thinks is in the best interest.
Okay, since you use New Jersey as an example, my understanding is that they had a recent Board of Public Utilities meeting, and that the builder of New Jersey wind farm is looking for more money from the ratepayers, is my understanding.
Do you know which specific project that was?
It's referencing Orsted. and I'll be happy to share this article with my colleagues, and I'm trying to walk through it to make sure I understand. When you mentioned New Jersey, I was trying to then understand what this, the bottom line here, it looks like back in 2019, New Jersey's Board of Public Utilities approved Orsted's plans to put 100 turbines 15 miles off the South Jersey coast. But at this point, given I guess some of the financial issues facing the developer, it looks like they're going back to the state, and we're back to the ratepayers. So that's why I was trying to understand who was actually paying for what parts. If the transmission is broken down in Maryland with this bill, I'm trying to figure out, number one, who's paying for what, and then two, Senator Augustine said he referenced, and we're going to buy the power. I don't know, was referencing the state of Maryland, and when we talk about that, if that's comparable to what other states are doing, and I guess if there's lessons learned from other states, seems to me we would want to factor this in before moving forward with this legislation. So I'm still trying to get a handle on really the transmission cost, and then and the breakdown of that, who pays for it, and then once, quote, we, the state of Maryland, buys it, what those costs mean as well.
Sure. I can answer that in part, and then if other folks want to chime in. It's a good question, Senator. So with regard to the transmission, trying to think how best to, so the mechanism that has been approved by FERC, the legal pathway for multiple states to cooperate on transmission projects like what is being proposed in this bill, is it has to be a voluntary approach. And so if Maryland through the PSC is able to coordinate with other states and they're willing to go in on a transmission solution together, there would have to be some kind of an agreement signed that would essentially allow for mapping out exactly how the costs would be allocated. So the states would all come to the table and say, you know, we want to pay for this portion of it because we're going to get this portion of the benefits, or however the state wanted to do that. If those other states don't come to the table, it would be Maryland going it alone. But then still, that's why there's this competitive solicitation, and the bid would come in, and then the state, the PSC, would be empowered to walk away if they felt like that wasn't a compelling set of cost benefit ratio essentially for those projects.
Senator, could we maybe just make this one the last one?
Okay.
If possible. And then,
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I will. What incentive would New Jersey have to come to the table with us when it looks like they're already concerned that the developer has come back to them and now is putting it more on the ratepayers? So I'm just really kind of struggling with that, because it just looks like, we've how do we put the costs out there, the true costs out there, and really be honest about who's paying for that?
So,
Oh.
go ahead, Alexa.
So I was just gonna say, as a point of clarity, as I'm dropping things, in the Senator Augustine's amendment, and this brings up a question that Evan is really doing a great job of explaining, between cost benefit and cost allocation, which the actual agreement that was in New Jersey said that the onus was on, and please correct where incorrect, that the onus was on those ratepayers within the state to cover it, because they didn't opt for another approach that would have allowed states or outside states to contribute to the cost of these facilities and development. This bill and the amendments that we're looking at, well, the bill and amendments leave that option open. The Senator Augustine's amendments specify that in these approvals, you have to look at cost benefit, which is separate from cost allocation, because cost benefit talks specifically about the distribution of costs amongst ratepayers within the state, whereas cost allocation, distinct from how New Jersey did it, is talking about distributing those costs to other states. New Jersey, being the perennial example, did not opt for that cost allocation because they stuck within the state to distribute the funds amongst ratepayers. So within Senator Augustine's amendment, both of those will be contemplated. And they'll, in PSC / PJM / PSC or PJM, whichever option entity we opt to allow, we give that deference to in terms of evaluating that those proposals, but they'll be able to look at it and analyze which one gets cost benefit, which one gets cost allocation, and be able to evaluate just the veracity of those projects.
And if I may add, Senator, so for the cost benefit analysis, which I understand is in the amendments in Senator Augustine's amendments, that would add to those statutory factors that the commission is considering. So in other words, is the ratepayer paying $1 on their bill and getting $1 back in benefits? Kind of like Evan was speaking about the New Jersey example, but we would here in Maryland be doing that analysis before selecting the project.
Okay, Senator Hester, you had your light on, you wanted it off? And if you do, then you're gonna have the final word. This is what we're gonna do, guys. We're gonna hold the bills from Senator Washington, and we will take that up on Tuesday. And this will be back on Tuesday. In the meantime, you will have the final word, and then we're done for the weekend. I sense people want to get the heck out of here. Do you have a question or no? Okay, then we're done. Have a good weekend, guys.